think I fall into the category of parents who want as much information about the Common Core curriculum as possible. And I asked Karen Schroeder to come down here from Rice Lake, Wisconsin, to give us a little more information, maybe some information we don't necessarily hear from our school district. Karen has a great perspective. She's very knowledgeable, completely knowledgeable about Common Core. She was an educator for 36 years. She negotiated contracts on behalf of teachers, and she's been a freelance writer for the last 20 years on educational issues, and I think we will all get a really good, try to round out our knowledge about Common Core curriculum. So I want to thank you so much, Karen, for coming, and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. It's so nice of you to come on such a gorgeous night, and you can be home with family and friends and watching a good TV show, and instead you care so much about the children in your community. You came here tonight. I really admire that. Thank you so much. Yes, I was a teacher for 36 years, and during that time, I started in 1972. And it didn't take very long into my career when I noticed that the curriculum was removing all conservative ideologies, and the school library was removing conservative current events materials. And as a person who loves truth in education, and we teachers are supposed to be responsible for teaching critical thinking skills, you cannot do that unless you have respect for both sides of the issue. And when people are removing those conservative ideologies, that's censorship. And censorship is a very aggressive form of bullying. And I tried to deal with that as a teacher and realized that the way I would be most effective would be once I retired. And so I started Advocates for Academic Freedom, and we protect the academic freedom of all children. The definition of academic freedom is to teach, which we hear a lot about, and to study without fear of reprisal. And so we focus on working with parents, teachers. We're a national organization. We take no federal money or money from any corporation. And we are completely funded by private donations, and so we proudly say that we are the voice of the citizens of Wisconsin. We have about 69,000 members in the state of Wisconsin alone, so we're proud of that. I'm going to talk tonight about Common Core standards, but I'm going to talk about the history, because we need to change the way we address education reform. So the history part of this is really the most important part. So this gentleman is Benjamin Bloom. And how many are teachers in here? Anybody? Have you heard of Benjamin Bloom before? You want to tell us who he is?
I can't remember. It's been so long.
Well, Benjamin Bloom is an educational expert from the 1950s. And he created something called the Bloom's taxonomy. And if you look on the computer, you see this cute little triangle, and it's got the little colored doubles, but that really doesn't tell you very much about Benjamin Bloom. You really need to read his handbooks 1 and 2 in order to understand his taxonomy and the philosophy of that taxonomy. So I have given on the pink sheet, if you look at the top half of the pink sheet, that is Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy in 10 bullet points. And underneath it, you will see resources. So you can do your own research. I am not asking you to believe a thing I'm saying. In fact, I love it when people say to me, Karen, I'm going to prove you wrong. Because you see, when I started teaching and these changes started happening, I got very concerned. And I started doing my own research. And I was a Democrat in the beginning. It wasn't until I started that research that it completely changed everything about how I looked at most of our government and our institutions. And so I look forward to them proving me wrong, because I know exactly what they're going to find. In my notes, I have a Xerox copy of every education policy paper, every piece of education legislation, many pieces of education research that are hardbound, every United Nations treaty or declaration that had anything to do with education written since 1948. So I know exactly what they're going to find. Is there anyone who would like to read this statement from Benjamin Bloom so the whole group can, even the people in the back, can know what it says? Thank you, sir.
Education must control, too, so much of the individual's behavior that he is described and characterized as a person by these pervasive controlling tendencies, and the integration of these beliefs, ideas, and attitudes into a total philosophy or worldview.
Yes. This is not just Benjamin Bloom's philosophy, but this has been the philosophy of education since Horace Mann. It's been transforming, the transformation of education. When you look at Benjamin Bloom's 10 educational goals, I hope you will ask yourself how many of these deal with actually acquiring knowledge and developing skills, and how many of them deal with attitudes and behaviors and belief systems. How many of you remember Benjamin Skinner? Anyone heard of him? Nobody?
Behavior.
Okay. Well, Benjamin Bloom and B.F. Skinner, Bloom and Skinner got together and developed something called behavior modification. Anyone remember that? Well, we teachers and parents and school board members pushed that out of the educational system because it harmed the educational process. And as soon as we pushed it out, they had another program ready to go based on the same 10 educational goals. And that was called behavior objectives. Remember behavioral objectives, anybody? Well, we pushed that out. And as soon as we did, they had another program ready to go, outcome-based education, all based on the same 10 educational goals. Now, during this time, our educational system failed our kids so much so that A Nation at Risk was written. Have you ever heard of A Nation at Risk, you guys? Do you remember that? Because it was quite a while ago. A Nation at Risk gave suggestions for how our educational system should change, and most of them focused on acquisition of knowledge and development of skills. But those recommendations were not really accepted because they were talking about knowledge and skills. And the educational experts, as you will see, are talking about something else, about transformation of society's values and interests, so that we will be a society of people who will embrace a one world order. And they don't mince any words about it, as you will see. And every time we pushed out one of these policies, and a new one was created, the only difference was the curriculum more aggressively implemented Benjamin Bloom's 10 educational goals. And the federal government took a little more control of the educational system. The federal government has been shaping standards for quite a while. And they have played a key role in encouraging textbook companies to have those textbooks reflect those standards, which, if we have time tonight, I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. I'm modifying my presentation quite a bit because I'm going to interweave the upcoming hearing tomorrow, and how important that is and what's been going on there in with this discussion. Now, I wish I could say that Benjamin Bloom was where this started, but it surely wasn't. It was Horace Mann and John Dewey. Is there anyone able to read that so the people in the back know what it says? Any volunteer? Thank you.
The children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society that is coming, where everyone would be interdependent. Independent, self-reliant people would be a counterproductive anachronism in the collective society of the future, where people will be defined by their associations.
And this was said in 1896. And you know, I wish I could tell you John Dewey was kind of a man who stood alone. But he certainly was not. For every John Dewey that I can show you from 1896, I can show you 100 or so other educational experts that are saying even more aggressive things to them. And I hope that you will understand that this has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. This is how they see everybody in our society and everybody's children. Now, a lot of people say, well, Common Core is new. It's different. It's an improvement. Well, that is not true. Because the International Baccalaureate Organization, right here, have you heard of the International Baccalaureate Organization? Okay, well, if you go, you don't have this document, just I do, but you can get it online. Everything I'm talking about tonight is accessible online. And please notice that every single document I'm talking about is an original source document. It comes from the source itself. It's not a political site. The International Baccalaureate Organization, if you type in IBO Common Core, this is still on the site. A lot of the stuff, once it's on the site, I write about it and then they scrub it. But this is still there. It was anyhow several weeks ago. And it says that they helped write Common Core. Who knows what International Baccalaureate is? Anybody? Yes. Can you tell them a little bit about International Baccalaureate Organization?
Other than my grandsons attend school with the International Baccalaureate program in Indianapolis, it is, I think, it comes out of Switzerland.
Yes. A foreign entity, not elected by any American citizen. And they are helping to shape our policy. You have to decide if you like that or not. Each one of us has to decide that. Because if you do like it, you also have to think about how is that impacting our politics. Our form of government, our three branches of government. Because precedence carries a lot of weight in any government or any educational system or any society. So they say that they help write Common Core and that any teacher who is trained in International Baccalaureate should feel very comfortable teaching Common Core. Because Common Core shares the belief system and the values of International Baccalaureate. So if you look a little further on the website, the International Baccalaureate has a document called Continuum of International Education. It's not very long. It's on the internet. And it's mentioned on your pink sheet. This pink sheet has footnotes on it. So you can look this document up yourself. And in this document, they list their 8 goals of education. What they did is they took Bloom's 10 and they condensed a couple of his that were somewhat similar. And they used a little more sophisticated language. But if you compare these two sets of standards, basically they're the same thing. These two sets of educational goals are basically the same thing. Again, ask yourself as you read those goals, how many of them deal with acquiring knowledge and developing skills, and how many of them deal with value systems, belief systems, etc. Now, I give you this for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, if you are going to talk about Common Core standards to a teacher, they're not going to want your opinion because you're not in education, and who are you probably to say to them Common Core is bad? But they know, most of them know who Benjamin Bloom is, and if they don't, you can certainly feel very comfortable saying, why don't you? Because your college should have told you about Benjamin Bloom. When I learned about him, his textbook was $10 for a hardcover book. They're $458 now. That's how revered this man is, still in education, and how rare how hard it is to get a hold of any of his original books. But he's still influencing education, otherwise his books wouldn't be that valuable. So you might want to ask them that, and then you might want to say, not in a condescending way or an arrogant way, but just say, I was given this information, and it concerns me, and then you're an educator, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd help me out here. and show me that this is wrong, that we don't have to worry about this, that we shouldn't be concerned about it. Because if these educational goals impacted our educational system so much in the 50s and 60s that the nation at risk had a sentence in there that said if any foreign entity had come to America and done to our children what our educational system has done, it would be considered an act of war. That's how serious they took the decline in academics. There was a 4-year drop. What used to be expected in 12th grade was dropped by 4 years, but ever since then we've had another year drop, as you will see as we go on. Now, some people say to me, well, Karen, you just said the federal government has been involved in education for a long time. Why worry about this anymore with Common Core? Why should Common Core be any different? Well, remember when I said that each time a new program came out, the federal government took a little more control? Well, now they're federalizing education. That is the key here. I'm a teacher. I want standards. I want to know, when I go into my classroom, what is it that the community expects me to teach their children? I want a textbook that's aligned to those standards. I want to know that if you want me to make sure your kids are proficient in multiplication facts 0 to 10, that I have a textbook that will help me accomplish that. And if you give me that information, I personally don't mind being held accountable for it. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later too. But when the federal government is using our federal tax dollars to shape the standards and to make sure the textbook is aligned with those standards and that the tests are aligned with those standards, it is very detrimental, which I hope we'll have time for me to show you in a minute. The other problem with that is, how many of you in your lifetime have witnessed Social Security being reformed? Anybody? It's a federal program. The Social Security has been reformed in your lifetime? They've changed it? What did they do to reform it?
In the mid-'80s, they came out with the Windfall Elimination Act and the government pension offset.
And what did that do to Social Security?
Anybody collecting a Social Security check or anybody collecting a federal pension will no longer be allowed to collect Social Security, or it will be reduced, even if you're collecting on your spouse who never worked for the government, but because you get a pension, it's cut by about 50%.
That's right. That's the kind of reform. If there's reform at all, the only reform I remember is up until 1972, it was supposed to be voluntary. And so few people wanted to register for it that just before 1972, they made it mandatory. Now, remember when Social Security had the surplus of money? They were collecting more money than they were sending out. Did they invest that money so our generations would have more comfortable retirements? No. So what do you think is going to happen when the federal government gets control of our education dollars? All of them. Right now they have 100 million. But what happens when they get control of all of them?
Same thing that's going to happen to your health care.
Yes. So federalizing education has, and I've just touched on a couple very important, but just a couple of the consequences of a federalized education program. Now, some of you are saying, well, Karen, you don't need to worry about that federal government. They don't really want to do any harm. They aren't really, so what if it gets federalized? Well, don't listen to me. The Aspen Institute, right down there, has been shaping educational policy almost since Benjamin Bloom was around. Very impressive organization. Right now, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave them multi-millions of dollars for the purpose of supporting Common Core. Now, In 1975, they wrote this document. It's only 11 pages long. It's on the internet. It's called A New Civic Literacy: American Education and Global Interdependence. And it's a great article. Totally complaining about you and me and the teachers and the school boards. And it says in here that we do not have the wisdom necessary to know what our children will need to function in the 21st century. So their recommendation is to federalize education. They talk at length about how difficult and frustrating it is to have to go to each state or each school district, tell the people about their program, and convince the people to accept their program, because people weren't accepting their programs because we could see the flaws in them right away because they weren't practical. And we were pushing them out. So they wanted to federalize education so that they would not have to waste their time that way. And this is one of the statements in this document. Would anyone like to read it, please? Yeah.
Students in our public schools constitute the nation's greatest and most attractive sectors. Everybody who has anything to sell would naturally like to get at this market of future American adults and get at them as early in life as possible.
How many of you are offended by this? All right. I wish I could tell you that this was an anomaly. I wish I could tell you that it was a rarity. I hope someday you will invite me back to talk about the teacher training programs, because what they say about you and your children and the ethics in educational research will make your nylons melt. This is polite, ladies and gentlemen, compared to most of what I've read in my research. That completely changed the way I looked at my profession. And I tell you, when I was in that classroom, I became a warrior to protect my children. Now, this document also defines global interdependence, which I think you would find very interesting. I hope you will look it up and study that a little bit.
What was the title of that again?
It was A New Civic Literacy: American Education and Global Interdependence. Their definition of global interdependence will just shake your world, especially when you think about what you're hearing from our government today. This was 1975. It's a 1975 document. It's on the internet. It's only 11 pages, and every single page makes your eyes pop. I highly recommend reading it. So, this pink sheet, if you know a teacher, feel free to sit down with that teacher and talk to them about Common Core from this angle. It's a real nice way to start with an educator, because I think most of them would be interested in this. Please be confident. There are approximately 3 million teachers in the United States. 1.5 million had the courage of registering as a Republican. So almost 50% of educators are conservatives. But we are silenced, foolishly so. We allow ourselves to be silenced. But if you watch, that's changing. The National Education Association 4 days ago wrote an article called 10 Things You Should Know About Common Core. Within 24 hours of that article being sent out in their NEA Today, 92 teachers got online and called NEA liars, misrepresenters. They called them out for taking millions of dollars from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the purpose of supporting Common Core. And they did not mince words when they talked about what Common Core was doing in their classrooms. Many of those teachers were from New York and California and some of the states that have had Common Core in their classrooms for a longer period of time than they've already gotten into the testing component. Where Wisconsin is, we're up to our waist. But once we get those tests in our schools, we'll have it full-fledged. And so if you're a teacher, you really want to look at some of those comments because it will just motivate you, I'm sure. Now, they say that Common Core is rigorous. Okay. And some people say to me, well, Karen, just tell me what is the standard. And the legislators love this, and the DPI love this. They love to split this hair, and they put their nose in the air, and they say, Common Core standards are not curriculum. They're splitting up false hair, ladies and gentlemen. My response to that is, well, then why is the federal government aligning curriculum to the standards? And why are they aligning the test to the standards, not the curriculum? They're aligning the test to the standards. So standards are not, technically, they are not curriculum, but standards determine, they shape the curriculum. So, Common Core is English and math only. I know many of you have heard about the health curriculum and you've heard about a data collection system. Neither of those have anything to do with Common Core. If you get Common Core out of your schools, you will still have those two issues that you need to deal with. If you get just the standards out of your school and you leave the curriculum and the tests in your school, you still have Common Core. You have to get all three. The curriculum, the standards, and the tests. All three have to get out of your school if you're going to be rid of Common Core. So, knowing that standards are not curriculum, your yellow sheet are the Common Core standards for math for 4th grade. So, you can see on here that you have two websites. That's the handouts are over here if you'd like, if you need some. There are two websites. One is the actual Common Core website, and the other one is our Wisconsin DPI website. Now, since I've testified twice on this issue, it may have changed, but originally, and the reason I was bold in putting these two sources down for you is because every time I looked up the Common Core and the grade level and subject, they were identical. Even though Wisconsin students excelled in a couple of areas, the Wisconsin DPI did not bother to enhance any of the standards to match the success of our students. They just adopted the entire Common Core, which I found to be rather insulting as a teacher and I would think certainly as a taxpayer, and I would think parents would as well. All right, so if you go to the DPI website, you type in your subject. In this case, I typed in math because we're going to pretend I'm a math teacher. Type in your grade level. I typed in 4th grade. This tells me what I'm going to be teaching in my classroom. Okay? These are the Common Core standards for 4th grade. This is not the curriculum. These are the standards. The curriculum means there will be several pages in a math book that helps the teacher accomplish each of these things. And we don't have a lot of time, so we aren't going to look at all of them, but when you look at them, I hope you will ask yourself, what test question could I write to make sure that the student and teacher that they were successful in achieving this standard? So let's look at the first one. Use the for operation with whole numbers to solve problems. Not a bad standard. What is familiarity? How would you define that? How would you write a test question for it? And you, as a citizen, can determine, and I will show you in a minute how, whether or not they should be gaining familiarity or if they should be mastering this concept. Because of time, we're going to skip over to the second page, number 3. And it says, now 4th graders are 9-year-olds. It says, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. 9-year-olds. 5 times 5. What is a viable argument? How do you define a viable argument? If I gave each of you a piece of paper and asked you to define a viable argument, I would get 60, 70 different answers. How are you going to assess student success in that? And then it says, critique the reasoning of others. What do you do as a teacher if you have a nonconformist who says, I'm sorry, I'm not critiquing my friend over here? What is the remediation? Will that remediation discourage that child from developing that nonconformity and using it in the most productive way and knowing when not being a nonconformist can be harmful to that child, the way an education system is supposed to? And why is this an important question for us? Because nonconformity is a personality characteristic of most of our creative, innovative children. And Common Core says it is going to improve creativity and innovation in our children and teachers. It is not. Now, the green sheet, yes.
I was just going to say, you have these young children critiquing others. We don't have enough bullying already.
Exactly. And you know, when I was going to not mention this but I'm when they say that they have to retrain teachers to teach Common Core, as a teacher, I am so offended by that. I am a math teacher. I can teach the Pythagorean theorem to 11-year-olds. I can teach calculus and trig to 11-year-olds. Math has not changed for 5,000 years at least. Math is math. Every single teaching method known today has been used by Aristotle and Socrates. When I went to college, I was trained how to properly use those teaching methods. The only thing that has changed is that there's some technology available that makes using that curriculum and employing those teaching techniques a little easier and a little more fun. But I don't need to be a whole retrained. All I need to do is, I already have to take classes to renew my certificate. All I have to do is take a class and I can accomplish the same thing. This $16 billion, this costs 16 billion federal tax dollars, and about a third of it is being used to retrain teachers. And I'm saying that the reason it is, because I've been there, they're teaching teachers that number 3 is something they need to do if they're going to be morally right with their students, and if they fail, then they have failed as teachers. That's what we were taught with cooperative grouping, which was a failed teaching method. That's what we were taught in many of these training programs we had that were forcing us to accept something that we never would have accepted without their retraining. And most of us didn't accept it with the retraining.
Isn't that the purpose for certification? Indoctrination?
Well,
I mean, if you're getting certified, isn't it nice to be able to take a math course and not this indoctrination course?
it would be nice. It would be nice to be able to work on your master's in math or your master's in English. But that's another thing I'm working on with legislators right now is the teacher preparation and licensure. There's no, if you have a degree in math, you are a valuable asset to a wide variety of employers in a wide variety of, at any state. If you have a degree in education, you are only viable in that state. And you're not a valued employee. And here I was teaching calculus and trig, and I'm not valued anyplace else. So that's another issue for another day. This was free. These are the 10 standards for 4th grade math. Now, if you have a neighbor or a friend who has children in school, and you want to talk to them about Common Core, you might want to give them these 2 sheets and ask them to put them side by side and compare them and remind them this was 16 billion federal dollars, most of which came, 1/50 of it came from your state. And these were free and they're on the internet. Now, TIMS, how many of you have heard the expression, America ranks 36th in math? Have you heard that expression, something like that? Okay. TIMS does that. TIMS is the organization that tests children in every country and ranks their progress compared to every other country. TIMS has been around since the mid-1990s. The World Bank and UNESCO and the United Nations are behind TIMS. They're also behind this. You might want to ask yourself, as you're comparing these, why would there be such outstanding standards for the rest of the world from the same people who helped write this? Very good question. Anyhow, if you look at the TIMS standards for 4th grade, notice how many times the word knowledge is there. Notice how many times the word can is there. Notice how rarely they have children doing anything that's behavioral or attitudinal or passing judgment on anything. TIMS is truly internationally benchmarked because every country has accepted them as high standards, and every country has allowed their children to be compared with one another based on these standards. That's what makes them internationally benchmarked. These are not internationally benchmarked. Tony Evers has said that they are, and we, Advocates for Academic Freedom, has worked with Freedom Project and some citizens, and we brought in experts. And James Milgram, who sat on the Common Core Validation Committee, and Sandra Stotsky, who also sat on that validation committee for English. Milgram was math. They both explained why Common Core are inferior, why they would not sign off on the standards, and why they are not internationally benchmarked. Now, when you are home and you have some time, and you put these standards side by side, and you cross off the ones that they share. All the ones left over here, all the ones left over on the TIMS that are not on here have been delayed until 5th grade, and in some cases 6th grade. Now, people say, but these are state standards, Karen. These are not federal standards, they are state standards. That is not true. I made slides of all the companies that played a role in funding or shaping Common Core standards. I ended up with 12 slides. And I thought this is going to be really boring. So what I did is I tried to represent one of each kind of organization that played a role. And I did not put on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because almost everybody knows of them. But how many of you know that insurance companies are playing a key role in this? And I hope you will ask yourself why, because that's another presentation in itself. I'm not going to do anything on the data collection and data mining because we're going to talk about the hearings. The National Governors Association, they say, oh, Karen, don't you know the National Governors Association embraced this? Pa and Shaw. If you look at the latest tax release of the National Governors Association, 80% of their money comes from tax dollars, state and federal. Of that 80%, 50% comes from the federal government. Our schools get between, depending upon your school, 4 to 10% of their money comes from the federal government. And look at how much power they have over our schools for that puny little amount of money. Imagine the power they have over the National Governors Association. CCSSO, Council of Chief State School Officers, that's supposed to be an objective organization. If an NGO, that means it's a non-government organization. That means you can't even get data from them. You can't write and demand open records from them. Now, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is very helpful. You go to their site, and you can see that the National Governors Association received multiple millions of dollars from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the purpose of supporting Common Core, as did CCSSO. Those are hardly objective organizations. They no longer have credibility. And that's really hard because Advocates for Academic Freedom lives on pennies because we live solely on private donations, but by George, we have credibility. There is nobody who bought what we are saying. But the Thomas Fordham Institute is going to be testifying for a second time on Wednesday, and they've received multiple millions of dollars for the purpose of supporting Common Core. Now, they say, well, why is it such a big deal that Common Core it's going to be federalized, and the federal government is taking control of the tests? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a perfect example. Now, Common Core is not social studies. It's math and English only, so I don't want to confuse that. But standards are standards, and the federal government has been shaping the standards for a long time. So I'm going to use a social studies example because we can all relate to that. Not everyone can relate to an English or a math exam. So, when I started teaching in 1972, my history textbook had 2 sentences about a republic. One was a very superficial definition, and the other simply stated that America is a republic. Which wasn't correct. America is a constitutional republic, but anyhow. The rest of the book was about democracies. Well, in those days, the tests were private, they were separate, and we teachers figured that those test makers were going to ask themselves, well, what's the most important thing that 6th graders should know about the government? And we figured it was that we were a constitutional republic. So we teachers, many of us, brought in all kinds of resource materials, and we taught our children that we were a constitutional republic and the historical significance of that. We taught them that our founding fathers were brilliant historians and understood governments and gave us a constitutional republic because our freedoms were granted by God. And if you don't believe in God, it means they are natural, like the color of your eyes or the height of your body. Nobody can take that from you. And we made sure that our children understood that our founders, many of them, warned future generations against ever becoming any form of a democracy because they're self-destructive governments. So at the end of the year, the question what form of government was shaped by the U.S. Constitution, our kids got it right. And the kids in classrooms of extremely talented, dedicated teachers who trusted their educational experts and followed that book to the letter got it wrong. And one year, we just did a little casual spot check, and we said to a few kids, how come did you put down democracy for the answer for that question? And they said, well, we remembered reading a lot about democracies, and they sounded pretty cool, and America's pretty cool. So we figured America must be a democracy. Now, the textbook never said America was a democracy, but it led the kids to believe that. By 1980, any reference to republic was out of the book. And this is just an example of emails that I have gotten from parents and teachers from across the state, and it's complaining because they provide samples of the lesson and samples of the index and the table of contents and the dictionary, and they're complaining because the word republic can be found nowhere. Nowhere. And this has been since the 80s. So now we've got the 80s, the 90s. We've got a lot of years where our people don't even know what a republic is, right? Well, if the federal government had made a test to align with this standard, could teachers have brought in information explaining that America was a constitutional republic? No, because the kids will get the answer wrong. Because the answer now, what kind of government is America, is democracy. So we have surrendered our constitutional republic without shedding a single drop of blood. And for those of you who know how a democracy works and how a constitutional republic works, you know that our government has been functioning as a democracy for a very long time. Once in a constitutional republic, you all know, so I'm not going to bore you with it. But anyhow, now we're up to 2010. And I'm getting emails and samples of books like mad from parents in Wisconsin. This is from a parent who is sending their child to a very prestigious Catholic school. And he's angry because her high school textbook called the American Pageant, which is a U.S. history textbook, written by David M. Kennedy, has republicanism in it. Now you'd think he'd be pleased, wouldn't you? Don't you think he'd be thrilled? I mean, he's a conservative parent sending his kids to a private Catholic school. And republicanism is in the book. Right? Well, I've done some research, and this book is used throughout Wisconsin. Dane County, up by Hayward. Well, this is the definition of republicanism. Two ideals in particular had taken root in the minds of the American colonists by the mid-18th century. One was what historians call republicanism. Looking to the models of the ancient Greek and Roman republics, are you ready? Exponents of republicanism defined a just society as one in which all citizens willingly subordinate their private, selfish interests in the common good. It is communism. It is communism. And if you think that American social and political policy is not shaped in our classroom, you are sadly mistaken. And that is why the federalization of education is so serious. Now, people say, well, why do you give us the history lesson, Karen? This is why. I've been at this for 40 years, and to just simplify it, think of it this way. Your neighbor's yard is filled with dandelions. He knows you don't like it, so he runs around and he picks all the flower heads. And he says, there, I solved the problem. Has he? No. That's how we've been dealing with education reform. We have a governor who has opened the door wide. He has said, Wisconsin deserves better. Finally. We should have superior standards. He could not have opened that door any wider. It's now up to us. And if we don't go to those hearings, and there's only one hearing left, the last two hearings, hardly any conservatives showed up.
Really?
Yeah. The one in Madison was packed. And the one in Eau Claire, there were about 90 people in favor of Common Core, and only 5 of us showed up who were opposed to it.
And where's the next one?
Wausau, at the Technical College in Wausau.
That's away.
Tomorrow.
2.5 hour ride or what?
Yep.
Why isn't there something around here?
There was. Fond du Lac, yes. I couldn't go to that one because I was speaking in another state and I couldn't get back in time. I tried so hard. But I've been to all the others.
What happens at these hearings? What are they debating, or how does that work as far as our future educational decisions?
All right. Because we've made a lot of noise, our legislators decided they were going to have hearings because local control of school was not being followed, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is how I'm changing this presentation a little bit. And because we're a local control state, which means we're supposed to have power at our state school board level, and they're supposed to contact us and say, this is what Common Core is, these are the pros and the cons, do you want it? And you as citizens are supposed to say yes or no. They didn't do that. They just implemented it, and because we complain, they're having these hearings, and they want to know how many people are opposed, now if or in favor. And If there are sufficient effective arguments in opposition, they will say to Tony Evers, you will replace Common Core with whatever, and it's going to cost this much, and the citizens have said that's fine with them, and Tony Evers has already said if our legislators do that he's going to take it to the Supreme Court. Now, those of you who have worked with me for a long time know that one of the things I've been saying to people is when you go, please go. Please go. You do not have to testify. You can fill out a piece of paper with your name on it and just indicate if you're pro or con. If you testify, which would be wonderful, you do not have to have a long, multi-paragraph. All you need is one sentence, or two, or three. All you need to do is get up there and say, ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to see any federally aligned curriculum standards or tests in my school. Thank you very much. That's all you have to say. Or you can say, ladies and gentlemen, I believe in local control of schools and the way Common Core was implemented. We as citizens were ignored. I don't want to see that happen again. Please replace Common Core. And I have been recommending, because Tony Evers lied, he said in his testimony that it would take years to write new standards and years to implement it. Because he took that stand, he no longer has the right to decide what the alternative should be. So I've been recommending to everybody to recommend the Massachusetts standards, because the state of Massachusetts, for 10 years, their students have excelled in reading, math, English, and science. And that is because their math has been TIMS, which I showed you tonight. Their reading has been PEARLS. PEARLS is the TIMS of reading. It's the same organization, it's just the reading side of it. Science, their science is TIMS. TIMS is Trends in Math and Science Studies. So the TIMS standards has a set of science standards available, and Massachusetts adopted those. And Massachusetts used Dr. Sandra Stotsky's English standards. So if we adopted the Massachusetts standards, we would have all of those, and it's all superior to Common Core, and it's all free. Dr. Stotsky's standards on the website for Massachusetts, for English, her English standard says free to any state or school board. Free! Free! It's called collaboration. It's called truly putting children first.
According to the news, Massachusetts has adopted Common Core now.
They adopted Common Core, and their parents are going crazy. I'm getting emails left and right from parents, and they're supposed to be, the parents are telling me that they're supposed to be a local control state, and their school board is silencing them because the school boards are getting money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in that state to adopt Common Core. So, I mean, that's...
Karen,
yes.
if we can't get to Wausau tomorrow, what do you recommend? What can we do?
Oh, thank you. Well, can I say two things, because I don't want to forget it, and then don't let me, and I will answer yours. You have 2 white sheets of paper. 2 white sheets of paper. I'll give you mine. You don't have them? I don't have them. Oh, any? Okay, I think those are gone, but help us out with this. All right. On one of them, it says that Wisconsin is a local control state, and that she defines it. This is from the Department of Public Instruction. She defines it, and she says that means that all the community people who are going to feel the consequences of those standards are supposed to be involved in creating those standards. On the second one, I asked her, if a school district chooses to reject Common Core, will they keep their state and federal funding? And she says, yes, they keep their state and federal funding. And she says that the school board has the right to select inferior or superior standards. Now, nobody really thinks you're going to select inferior standards. The reason for that language is, and think of Tony Evers as I'm explaining this, the reason for that language is no school board should have to argue with a narcissistic bureaucrat about whether or not the standards they want for their children are good enough. So what that language does is simply remove the bureaucrat from power over you. Because nobody truly believes that you want your children to have an inferior set of standards if you are made aware of something that is superior. That you will have the wherewithal to do what you are being asked to do today. Take Common Core standards and put them side by side with another set of standards, and if you think Common Core is truly superior, go ahead and keep it. But if you don't, then stop it. Go to your school boards and stop it. Go to those hearings. Please go to those hearings. Now, if you can't go to the hearings, Advocates for Academic Freedom has been, well, 3 years ago when I started this, they wouldn't even talk to me about Common Core. Not to anybody, not conservative legislators, nobody. A couple of them said, Karen, Common Core is going to save education. And I'm going, no, it's not. And so I started going around the state talking to groups. And every time I went to a group like this, I got 1 or 2 names of movers and shakers. And after I felt that I had gone from north to south, then we had a Call Your Legislator campaign. So everybody was calling, all the organizers got everyone they knew to call. And then we had an Email Your Legislator campaign. And all these people were emailing, and it was enough so that when I called again to ask if they would sit down and talk to me about Common Core, they sat down and talked to me about Common Core. After they talked to me about it, and a few of others, they kind of acted like that was enough. They placated us. So we had more phone calls and more emails, and that got us to the hearings. And the hearings were stacked. 6 people came to speak in favor of Common Core. Only 2 of us spoke against it. And because that room was so packed, they had to give us a second room. We had critical. We were heard, even though there were just 2 of us. It's you people. You people, always. It is not 1 or 2. 1 or 2 people cannot do this. You need to, I gave you these handouts because my prayer is that you will sit down with a teacher and not say, this is my opinion, because they don't want to hear your opinion. Say to them, this is what was presented at a seminar, and I know you're in the profession. Can you help me with this a little bit and tell me where this is wrong? Because I know.